look after yourself. We have a live presentation this evening, and the topic this evening will be domestic violence, and we'll be referring to that as DV. Wow, it's hot today, isn't it, Carly? Incredibly hot, my goodness. I feel like it probably got to 38, but in this room, we've had the air conditioner on, but unfortunately it's not powerful enough for us. You know what we probably could do? We probably need to drink lots of water to ensure that we're hydrated enough. That's a really clever idea. No, I don't have a water bottle with me. I actually drank a lot of water before I came in here. So during this production this evening, I'll be focusing on all of you, our online audience. This is our first session. I think it's important we look after ourselves before we go looking after you this evening. I think there might have been a problem with it freezing. Our apologies, there might be issues with the technology. I'm just wondering, is it back online now? I think it's working now. Let me see, we've got 6 people that are watching. Okay, so this is the first time we've done this, so unfortunately we have issues with technology. If you've got an issue, please let us know, and then type in any comments that you wish to make, or let us know that you're here. Just excuse me for a moment, Carly, I need to check something. Seems to be working fine from our end. Okay, hopefully we'll maintain a connection. So, as I said before, this is the first time we've had 2 interpreters employed to provide interpretation for our discussion with our important guest speaker this evening. Her name is Debra Swann, and she'll be talking about the topic of domestic violence and what she's doing. That's right, that is what we're talking about. What is it? Okay, so it's called the Deaf Survivors of Domestic Violence Australia. So I suppose you're all wondering, what is domestic violence? I think that's something we can pose to Deb. So without any further ado, I would like to invite Debra to come and have a chat with us this evening.
Hello, and it's lovely to see you two tonight.
Welcome, Debra.
Hi, everyone in Homeland.
Thank you so much for coming here this evening and speaking to us and talking to the wider community. You've brought your bottle of water with you.
Well, it's such a hot day, and it's very, very exhausting. So, yes, like you guys, I need to look after myself, and I've brought some water.
And as I've already said, it's important for you to look after yourself before others.
Do you both have your water?
Maybe the 2 of you can share Debra's. So, Carly and I have a number of questions that we'd like to pose to you this evening, Debra. If you can help all of us, I suppose, understand what is domestic violence. And I have one question I'm really keen to ask you. Domestic violence, I think many people think that it's violence that occurs in the home, and it's physical violence. And I suppose this is the language that the deaf community use, and their sign for abuse. Can you explain what exactly is domestic violence?
Sure. Well, domestic violence is very broad. It's not just one way of understanding. Most people think that domestic violence is about physical abuse against one person, but it could be emotional, it could be psychological, it could be financial, even sexual abuse that happens. So I'm supposing this sign for abuse is not the correct sign, really. So I will be spelling abuse today. It can happen in the home, it can happen at work, or even at school, or out in the community. So really...
In the family?
Yes, and in the family. So it can happen anywhere.
So Debra, I think it's wonderful that we have a specialist support group now that's been established, and I'd like to hear more about domestic violence and the work that you're doing. And so this is a great opportunity to learn about that. And I think I've learned a lot of different sign languages, and really it's really about controlling, I suppose, domestic violence. And I'm just wondering, how do you see it?
Well, control is one form that fits into all of these various abuses that I've spoken about. emotional control, how the person thinks, what they do, how they behave. All of these things are part of controlling, even financial controlling where you go. It could be a psychological control. It could be trying to control the way you think about things. And it can happen a lot in a domestic relationship environment.
So, Deborah, do you think you could give us some examples of, I suppose, mental abuse or manipulation?
Well, yes, it can be quite a sensitive area to talk about when we're talking about control, abuse, particularly in the psychological arena, because there has been research in that area. There's a lot more research that does need to be done. One example could be if they're talking in insulting ways to their partner.
I'm just wondering, can I query that sign that
in
you're
a home,
using?
say I'm cooking dinner and my partner says, oh, you have done the wrong thing with your cooking. They throw the food out, or they say you're hopeless, or they swear at me because of my cooking style. And for me, I feel like I'm not good enough. I feel like they're putting pressure on me and they're insulting me.
Okay, so there's no physical abuse really
Well,
involved
physically,
in that.
no.
It's verbal abuse, but using signs. So could you tell me a little bit more about the name of your new organisation, the DSDVA? And I'm just wondering, how did you come up with that name?
Yes, well, DSDVA, the Deaf Survivors of Domestic Violence Australia, started in 2016. As you know, there was a conference that happened in November in 2016, and it was talking about mental health. It was that conference that was run by Vic Deaf.
Yes, that's right, and Carly Health
You're right.
Services as well.
And there was another deaf woman, Kate Frost, KJ. Both of us, we presented about domestic violence and what that entails and how that impacted on us personally. And so we spoke about that for the deaf community. And the response that we received from that forum was really overwhelming for us to start with. So many people came up to us and exposed their experience of various forms of domestic violence. So it is prevalent within the deaf community. And so with that, from that time, we decided to create, well, really, because all of us who are survivors, we have all gone through a form of domestic violence, and we've had barriers, and we've had these stories that have come to us. We've had barriers with talking to the police, going to the hospital, accessing various services or accessing counselling who don't understand our deaf cultural background. So that is part of the issue. And it was really overwhelming for us to see that we need to do something and we need to start our own research. There are various research that has happened overseas, but unfortunately in Australia that's a miss.
Okay, so what do you think the deaf community here in Australia actually need in this regard?
Well, really, we need education, which is number one. I think education and then access to services. Like, where do we go when we feel alone and isolated? So in my personal experience where I have gone through domestic violence, it was a 5-year.
So you've actually had a
Yes,
personal experience.
That was my personal
having
experience.
domestic violence occur in your life.
Yes, and I think that is where I needed access to various supports. I rang the domestic violence helpline, and they asked me for my phone number. But
It's a little hard when you do.
I said, well, without a phone number, they couldn't help me. So I was out of sorts. I didn't know where to go. It was another 18 months before I could leave the situation that I was in. So that really impacted on me. And there were only a few people who knew my experience of being involved in domestic violence. And I received a phone call from my sister, and I was hoping to get help from her. And it was in the evening. I was at my home, and I realised that, yes, she had also experienced a domestic violence incident as well. So for 18 months, I needed the support of police. I went through the court system, and I realised that with my deaf background, that is what I had to explain every single time. We had to have a booking of interpreters, and for me, I realised that there is a severe need that is missing.
So this topic that we're discussing tonight is very sensitive. So those of you watching this evening, if you're at all impacted, please contact myself or Debra to discuss the issue, because we really work as a team. It's really important that we support the deaf community, particularly when it comes to the area of domestic violence. So we also have Hayley, who's here with us this evening, and she will actually pass any questions that you might have to us during this evening, and we'll be able to respond to those. I've got another question that I want to ask Debra as well, burning question actually. The importance of setting up, I suppose, a deaf domestic violence support group rather than using a generic service. What is the benefit, I suppose? And I suppose for those of you that aren't deaf this evening watching, I think it's really important to examine the experiences of the deaf survivor and also the barriers that they've found actually receiving services from generic services.
Well, sure. I think that from my own personal experience, as well as having supports from the few people that I had in my life, before we established DSDVA, the general services are wanting to be supportive of deaf people, but they don't know how to be culturally sensitive and aware. So with deaf people, when they're signing, it can look like it's aggressive behaviour, but it's actually not. It's an expressive visual language, and it's how we express our emotions. Hearing people use their tone of voice to get that message across, to show their emotions. But with deaf people, our emotions come out within our body language. And hearing people and generalist services don't quite understand that. So having to write a report for the court system, it can be quite difficult, because they may suggest that using sign language is an aggressive form of emotion where it's not. So working with generalist services, they appreciate the understanding of deaf culture and deaf background. And so this is why when I was accessing counselling, it would have been about 3 or 4 sessions that it took me to explain my background as being a deaf person. And for me, that felt like I was wasting a lot of time.
And your needs aren't getting met during that time either.
Yes, and so for me, it was like another barrier that I had to face. I was paying this counsellor to counsel me, but I was the one giving all of that background information. So I felt like it was a waste of my time, and that really impacted on me as to where do I go as a deaf person to access these services. And we know that the deaf community is very small. So I did my own research to find what we had. And I looked overseas to see what they have. In London, they have Sign Health, which is auspiced under domestic violence institutes. And I could see that there was a lot of work that had been done, but we needed something on our local shores to support the deaf community of Australia.
Wow. So I'm just thinking, Deb, where do you want this to take us? In Utopia, where would you see this? The ideas, the concepts that you've seen overseas, what would you envisage that we could do here to help the Australian deaf community in the area of domestic violence? Did you know that Debra actually is a recipient of a Churchill Scholarship? It's a bit of a tricky one to spit out. And so well done, Debra, in being a recipient of the Churchill Fellowship.
Yes, I received the Churchill Fellowship, and I'll let you know what that is. It's a trust, it's a government funding scheme that those in Australia who have applied and have been successful beneficiaries of this means that we are looking for how to improve the lives of Australian citizens. And I was one of the lucky 11 people to receive the Churchill Fellowship in South Australia.
Congratulations.
And so my research is based on how these services overseas have been established, which is one, and where they've got their funding from, which is another important aspect that we need to consider, and how they manage small communities such as the deaf community, how we manage and how also we can provide these services for deaf people widespread. because we don't have 100 million people living in the one local area. We are quite spread out and diverse across where we live in Australia.
So really, it's not about just setting up one agency to provide to deaf people that are really dispersed all over the country.
Well, I guess the dream is really for each state to have an accessible service. I mean, we can't have one provision nationally. I think we would be spending way too much money and resources on flying everywhere. So, and also, I prefer to be at home, not always out.
We can't have
out travelling.
We can't have it in Central Australia either.
So I think it would be beneficial for each state to have their own cohort that is established, where people are working within that area. But really, we need much more. And from DSDVA, we are thinking about the levels of education, mainstream education, police, hospital, access to doctors, domestic violence organisations, and working in partnership with domestic violence organisations and referrals. We can't do absolutely everything, but we need to establish partnerships. We need to be in discussions, and we need to ensure that we are accessing the right information. So, I mean, I would love to have a big property where there's a house where we can go on a retreat and shelter people who have experienced domestic violence, and also have that privacy as well. I mean, could we have a deaf house for domestic violence? I know that that would be amazing if we could have that established.
And that's pretty difficult if you've got a deaf person who's living in a rural regional area.
Well, that's right. I mean, to have a safe house, we need to have that element of safety. And also, it needs to be somewhere where the general community don't know where it is. But as the deaf community is very small, that's impossible to come about. So we need to work in partnership with the various organisations. Education in schools is also important because it's related to health, friendship, bullying, and all those sorts of things are important as well. So as children grow up to be adults, we need to know what healthy relationships are and what they mean.
That's great. That's fantastic.
And also for the future, we need to have support within the court system, because there are so many barriers that happen when trying to access the court system. How do we access that, and how do we access supports, interpreters and so forth? We need to go into great detail and find out more. I mean, we need more than 1 hour to explain all of those significant barriers that we face: the court system, police system and legal system. And so we need to be able to also access direct services. So working in partnership with other counsellors, I mean, of course we can't do everything. We need to share the load and have the correct referrals and the system in place for that.
So I'm thinking about counselling and social work. Are you providing either of those services?
We provide social work. That's my background as an advocacy service worker, and later on in the future we will be able to provide counselling, but not right now. It is in process, so that is a future goal of ours.
So Deborah, do you actually have an academic degree for social work?
Yes, I do. I have a Master of Social Work, and also I have a degree in mental health as well. And there's one more that will occur, which is specialising in family violence and domestic violence area.
I like that word, the family violence and the domestic violence. I think they're pretty similar in many ways. I think domestic violence is probably a new term for the community. Family violence, it's about violence that occurs in the home. Yes, I can understand that, but the violence doesn't only occur in the home. It happens outside the home, in a school environment, work environment, as you've already said.
And it is a new term that is being used. Dating violence. That's a new terminology that we're using now for teenagers.
So it's about
relationships in the community. And so that's another term that we're working on. So at the moment we're in process with translating information from English into Auslan because we feel that the deaf community have missed out on this vital information, particularly with literacy levels and so forth. We need to make sure that it's accessible. So it's very important that we are helping out with the translation of that. We're in discussion as to what the meanings are of all these new terminologies, and we're in research with that and working in collaboration to ensure that the deaf community have access and understanding to that information in Auslan. So we're creating those videos.
Wow, your role is incredibly important, Debra. I know that, for example, some people work as deaf interpreters, and I know that often the deaf interpreter will assist the client to ensure that they bridge the cultural divide between those that are not deaf and those in the deaf community. I think that's really important, that communication of cultural access also occurs. I think, and that's what really you're doing in the work that you do. You're working with other professionals to try and bridge that cultural language divide and explain to them what it is to have a lived experience as a deaf person going through domestic violence, so that these other service providers really do understand what that means. So congratulations. I think the experience that you've had as an individual and a survivor of domestic violence, I think is very pertinent, because it's about supporting people that have had a life experience. So really Debra's able to identify with that. We can see this evening there is a number of you wanting to ask some questions.
We have 3 questions so far. The first question being, how long have you been working in this area, Debra? Okay, this area has been in progress since 2016, from the first mental health conference that was held in November 2016. So what does that mean? 3 years. It's been in progress for 3 years.
You have another question?
The second question is providing counselling via Skype. Okay, well, yes, we can provide Skype advocacy services, but not yet into counselling. That is something that we are looking for the future. So yes, you can converse via SMS or Skype, whatever you're more comfortable with. We can work via email as well. So soon, we are in the process of developing a website, which will be for release soon enough.
I think we have another question.
And the third question from the audience, there's a lot of people who are saying the same thing. We need more people like you. So thank you, Debra, for your advocacy for the deaf community. And it's a really good starting point. So thank you for teaching us about the ways that we are able to access these services. And thank you so much. Well, thank you for your lovely support as well. It's really important that we as a deaf community are working together in collaboration to make sure that this is happening for the benefit of everybody.
We were talking recently about the issue of trust. And that really plays a big part, especially within the deaf community. So I suppose, how do you think you can gain the trust of setting up a support group within such a small community?
Well, that's a really hard one, because, yes, the first support group that, I mean, we all know each other? Sometimes it's raw, and our trust has been broken in previous experiences, so it can be difficult to develop that trust. It takes time, it takes patience and explanation, and we need to make sure that it is confidential. So really, the time that it takes, if it means one person, it could maybe take 3 or 4 sessions before they feel and develop that trust. So yes, patience is the key importance really, because confidentiality also is number 1 for our group that we have.
Is there any more questions at all, Kaylee?
There's just more statements, no more questions, but many saying thank you so much for this video.
Thank you for your comments and feedback. I think we're just about ready to wrap up, but I want to congratulate you, Debra, on coming here this evening and really sharing with the the deaf community about the work that you're doing and what you envisage this area to look like in the future as far as supporting deaf people.
And before I go, I'd like to say I have a gift for those who are here in the room. This is what I'm giving out tonight.
Fantastic. Just wondering if you can all see that.
And there's a small card that says you are wonderful, you are awesome. So you need to remember that, everybody out there, you are awesome. Survivors and those who are still going through issues, you are all awesome.
I'm just being told by Hayley there's another question from one of our viewers.
It may be helpful if you could train other people so the whole onus is not on you. Well, yes, I do have another person that I will be working with, and we will be working in partnership to create these videos. And the person is here in Victoria. I'm based in Adelaide at the moment, but the person in Victoria, they're working on a voluntary basis currently, and we're looking for funding so that we can share the workload. And we might be able to outsource and pay people to be involved in creating these videos. So at the moment, it's all a work in progress. And yes, the onus is all on me, but I do implore all of you to get involved. And hopefully we can create a wider network and work in partnership and as a team.
That's fabulous. I do love this card. You are awesome. It really reminds me. Can I tell you a little story? Bring it on, Ross. I remember years ago I was travelling around Australia and I was in a situation that I found really difficult, and I hit a number of roadblocks in my life, and I was incredibly depressed. And where I was staying at that particular time, there was the owner of the property came in, and they could see that I had issues that were confronting me. And he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Well, actually, no, I'm not." He knew that I was deaf, and then got out the phone and asked me, you know, what's the matter? And I sat there and texted a long explanation. And they said, "Don't worry, you'll be okay." And I've always remembered that. That had a huge impact on me. And I think, you know, at that time in my life that I was finding it really difficult, you know, and it was just that being able to turn the corner.
Well, difficult roads will always lead you to the beautiful destination.
Oh, thank you for that story, Ross. I think, yeah, I think all of us have those issues occur in our lives. And it's a time when we perhaps need to access services. And yes, I do like this one. I need my glasses on, I think, Carly. Maybe you need to read this. People aren't perfect. They're flawed, quirky. Yeah, probably like me. Like you, Ross. Yeah, I'm a little quirky. I take that on board. That's fine. That's part of who I am, Carly. Maybe you can hold this. Don't look for a miracle, okay? It's not about a miracle. Be yourself. You are the miracle. That's who you are. Your miracle is within you and within all of us.
And I also have 2 cards for the interpreters as well.
So thank you so much, Deborah, for joining us this evening.
Thank you. And anytime, please contact me. We have a Facebook page, DSDVA, Deaf Survivors of Domestic Violence Australia. So please contact me at any time.
Wonderful. And all the very, very best with the Churchill Fellowship and all the research you're about to do.
Thank you so much.
Wow, that was really interesting, wasn't it? What a fabulous discussion with Deborah. And I think so positive for the deaf community. I think we've learned an enormous amount from her this evening. For me, what I've learned is really about the future. It's the future of deaf people. I think it's really exciting that we're able to assist one another by perhaps sharing our experiences. And I suppose thinking more broadly about how we can support people in the deaf community. I think that's a perfect example of what Deborah has explained to us this evening and what she's actually doing. She's taking action. So what do you think you learned, Carly? Well, for me, I think special people like Deborah, to have that unique experience and getting the Churchill Fellowship and and setting up the support group, and it's just inspiring to hear people doing that. I think it's not just, you know, only one person out there. There's a number of people. I think professionals really value partnership, working collaboratively, and I think that's just awesome. Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think just one side note, if I could, let's say something about food, nutrition. Oh, here we go. So if you watching this evening are feeling a little down and you feel like you have a need to eat chocolate, my recommendation would be to go and purchase some dark chocolate. Something that's about 70% cocoa. Open it and suck on it like it's a lolly, okay? Don't just stick it in your mouth and crunch, but it will build up your energy levels and give you a little up, okay? That's my suggestion for this evening. Don't know whether you're all prepared to go out and do that. Personally, I like ice creams. That's just me. Yes, but 70% cocoa means that there is a lower sugar level, okay? Sometimes you might find it's not as sweet, but those chocolates that are very sweet will make you high, and you're going to then find that that high will end up on a very quick downward spiral to a low. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that this evening. Really valuable information. This evening's been very focused on mental health and domestic violence. So the next time that we'll be creating a session, it will be all about Ross, and it will all be about nutrition. Ross, our deaf chef, and he will be presenting that evening about nutrition. I'm very excited. I like anything that goes in the mouth. Nutrition is fabulous. I'm very passionate about that. So look after yourselves, and it will be the 2nd of April, which is a Tuesday at 7 o'clock. That's right, 7 o'clock Melbourne time. We started the live videos some time ago. I think it was last year, wasn't it? No, 2 years ago, actually. Oh, beg your pardon, I've forgotten. So, yes, 2 years ago. What was that? Oh, my goodness, time has flown. No, 2017. What are you talking about? 1990-something. Yes, I think it's a little hot in here. It's affecting one's brain. Okay, so do you have any ideas from Hayley? She came up with the idea this time of having various topics, one to do with yoga and mental health and nutrition, and we feel that it's really important to think about our overall well-being and mental health. And so it's really about you, Ross, providing the nutritional expertise. So the next video is all about me. Well, it's actually not. It's about food and nutrition. So see you there, and thank you for watching this evening. Good evening to all of you. Look after yourselves, keep yourself safe, and make sure you keep hydrated. And thank you so much to the interpreters this evening. Oh, Ross, you've probably heard there's lots of fires in Victoria at the moment, so please take care, all of you. Keep yourself safe. Okay? Look after yourself first.